Welcome to the Wraith RPG YouTube channel. My name's Deke. Today we're going to be doing the Fungal Folly Delve and the Lost Miners variant. In this delve we'll be fighting the Fungarian minion types. You can expect lots of mushrooms, spores, poisons, and green stuff on the ground that you'll want to avoid. Today I'm playing Protection Warrior with the Colossus Hero spec, and my item level is currently 610 and I have a 2-set bonus as of this last vault open. My Bran is currently level 48. We're going to set him up as healer and we're going to take a couple of damaging curios. We're going to take the Porcelain Arrowhead. It's going to give us a 50% critical increased chance for 5 seconds occasionally, which is pretty big. And we're also going to take the Amorphous Relic, which is going to either give us increased damage or increased haste as we enter combat, which is really powerful. Okay, getting into the run here, I do like to flask up and use Algari mana oils on my weapons just to get some extra buffs. You can also eat some buff food if you want. And keep in mind that if you do get low after a combat round, Bran will throw down a campfire that you can eat from and get a 5% main stat increase. So I've grown to love these Fungarian delves. The reason being is because these spores basically just nuke everything on the screen. They will one-shot you basically if you stand in them, but if you're able to kite all the spores on top of your mobs and pull your mob packs together, and then stun them in the spores, move out of the spore circle, it blows up and it basically kills all of the minions that are in the circle. This makes it so clearing a T11 can go much faster. You can probably shave 10 to 15 minutes off of your run just because you're able to nuke down the minions so fast with these spore mechanics. I would like to recommend that you not be afraid of the spores and you look at them more as tools for you to use to kill minions as opposed to something that could potentially kill you. So what you need to do is you just need to kind of round everything up and make sure that you get all of the spore aggro on you. You can see here, the main thing you have to watch for is you just really have to watch the health bars of the spores. You can see there, I basically nuked the entire room with 2 spores. So if you're able to get 2 or 3 of these stacked on top of each other and you're able to round up all the minions inside of the circles, it will most likely one-shot everything. And if you can't do that, the spores will respawn after they blow up in a few seconds, and then you can just re-aggro them, pull them onto the mobs, stun the mobs in the circles, and move out. And it might take you a couple times, but you can, even in this T11, you can see how quickly I'm able to burn down the mobs by doing this method. So I highly recommend going into these Fungarian delves and playing around with the spore mechanics so that you can learn to basically just blaze through these delves and get your loot much faster. This Lost Miners variant of Fungal Folly is actually one of the easiest variants to complete because it only has 2 stages. You're just rescuing 10 scouts, and then you are going to fight a boss after that. Now, in the middle here on this platform, it pretty much always spawns the same way, where there are 4 scouts in the center that are stunned. As soon as you enter the radius of the platform, 3 minions are going to spawn and attack you, and then when those die, 3 more are going to spawn and attack you, and this keeps happening until you spawn one big elite, which you're going to have to fight and kill. And once you kill all of those waves, then these 4 miners get freed. So this is pretty much the same every time. The platform usually has 2 spores on it, so you can use these same mechanics that I've been talking about to gather everything up and blow them up. It does take a few seconds for them to respawn though, so you might have to do a little bit of natural fighting here as well to get it all down. You can see here, this is the last minion that you'll have to fight in this wave, which are these spear tenders. And they're actually pretty easy. They do have a big shockwave thing you just have to move out of, and a battle cry you want to interrupt, but they're actually pretty easy to fight. And like I said, if you use the spores to deal damage to them, even with 1 spore, you can do quite a bit of damage to them and get them down pretty fast. So makes this stage pretty easy. One thing to keep in mind is a lot of these minions will cast Fungal Bolt or Decaying Bolt, and if you're trying to do the strategy where you're pulling the spores, just keep in mind that you may be getting casted on while you're running away. So I usually try to spell reflect or spell block during those phases, but obviously depending on what class you're playing, you'll have to figure out your own mechanics to work around that. But yeah, so if you try to aggro up a big room like I'm doing here and there's multiple spellcasters in it, it could be a little bit trickier to get down just because the spellcasters might not want to move with you and move with the circles, because the circles do chase you for a few seconds before they reach their final tick of health, and then they stop in place. You have another like second to move out and then they explode. So you just kind of have to feel out how pulling minions into the circles and when to time getting out of the circles. You can see here in this pack there were a lot of spellcasters, but I basically just used Reflect and Spell Block to mitigate my way through the issues of them not all being rounded up perfectly. If you're on something like a Death Knight, you can probably round stuff up really easy, and that probably make these parts even easier. Sporogenesis is something you'll see from these gnarled revivers, and what that spell does is it continually summons little mushroom adds, so you want to interrupt that spell if possible. I don't think I get good interrupts on that in this delve, but you do want to interrupt that as quickly as you can just so you don't have to spawn and fight a bunch more stuff. I did one pull where I let them spawn every single ad that they can for their cast bar just to see if I got XP for Bran, and you don't get any additional XP for Bran for killing those, so there's not really any value in allowing them to cast that spell. You also have these infected beasts, these kind of lizard-looking guys, and I think around 40% or so they go into this explosion where they just stop moving and they're going to explode. It takes them a little while to explode and die, but you can just move away from them and work on something else. You can kill another mob, you can go gather some ore or herbs that are around and just let them explode. Sometimes Bran will stun them and they have to restart their cast, but once they start that animation, they're not going to come out of it and you can just avoid them. Another feature of these Fungarian Delves are these little bouncy mushrooms, and those are something also to play around with. I think I've mentioned this in some other videos, where you can pull all the mobs into the spores to the side of a platform and jump off. Just make sure you don't jump directly on the mushroom or it'll bounce you right back up. Or you can pull them to the side of a wall, jump on a mushroom, and jump out of the explosion radius. The explosion radius won't hit you if you go up on top of the cliff. So there are just some little tricks that you can do there to play around some of these mechanics. I really do think that these Fungarian Delves are some of the most interesting mechanically that you have to play around with. You actually can do things with the environment itself just to make your run so much easier. Now, we've made it here to the boss fight, and one thing I'd like to mention is that you can round up all these spores and put them on top of the boss and it won't do any damage to him. So the boss is immune to the spore damage, so you will have to do a legitimate fight on the boss. So I killed myself one time trying to test these spores on the boss, trying to get them to do damage to him, which they would not. And when I ran back up, I grabbed this little treasure that gives me 1 minute of haste, which turns you into a little mushroom. On this boss, the Spin Shroom boss, he's very basic. Most Delve bosses are pretty basic. So he has his Whirlwind ability, and you can see the circle around it. You just want to kind of stand just outside of the circle. The damage isn't insane. Like, you can tank a little bit of the damage, but you don't want to just continually be hit by it. I do believe it has an interrupt mechanic to it as well if you're like a spellcaster or something, so you don't want to get touched by that. If you can avoid it, but you can kind of stand just outside the radius here. You can kind of see just outside the radius, and you can still do a little damage to him if you're close enough with melee abilities. As soon as that ability ends, he stuns himself, and so you can just kind of run in and get free damage. Here's where you want to blow any of your DPS cooldowns and things like that. And then he has this Spore Explosion or something like that. And what he does is he puts all of these circles all over the ground that are going to explode. They look very similar to the spores. If they explode and hit you, you die. There's no living through that, I don't think. Maybe a tank with all of their mitigation cooldowns as it goes off lives, but basically it's a one-shot mechanic, so you can't get hit by them. That's the most challenging part of this fight, is that between the spores on the ground, the actual foliage that is part of the ground, and the actual mechanic you need to dodge, there's a lot of similar looking things on the ground. So I would suggest putting your camera as a top down and familiarizing yourself with the color palette of what these spells are. So you can kind of see that the thing that is going to kill you, it leaves a residue on the ground. It's very, very bright green, and it has like a texture to it, and there's little mushrooms inside of it. That's what differentiates it between the ground effects and the actual spores, which are the same color, but they kind of have a smooth texture to them, or kind of swirly texture to them. So the spores are actually, it would be better for you to get hit by a spore than it would be to get hit by his explosion. The spores will hit you very hard, and they potentially could one-shot you, but they also have a little bit more time that you can move out of them once they've targeted on you, so you can keep running and get out of them. The main thing you want to be doing here is finding an area where you're not going to get hit by that explosion. That thing is the one thing that's going to kill you in here. The last ability that he has is a charge, and it just basically, he just picks a direction and charges in it. This doesn't hit that hard, so even if you get hit by it, it's not that big of a deal. You could be knocked off of the cliff if you're mispositioned when he does it, so just be aware of that. But that's about it. You know, you want to do most of your damage when he's stunned here. Don't bother with any of the Spore mechanics because they don't do anything to him. And just be sure that your camera is set up in a way to where you can really look at the ground and differentiate between the effects that you need to not be in and the effects that are okay to stand near. Again, you can see I try to do as much damage as I can while he's doing his whirlwind, just because it doesn't do that much damage to me, and you can kind of DPS him without being hit by it too much. And then right after, he's going to be stunned, so you kind of want to be close to him for that phase. After that stun phase, it's random whether or not he casts his Spore Explosion or if he does a charge again, so you just kind of have to play around that. It's not exactly predictable on what he's going to do after that. I think both the charge and the explosion leave residue pools on the ground that you don't want to stand in. So you really just need to be kind of strategic about where you're positioning him while you're fighting. My general go-to way that I position bosses in any of these delves, or even in mythics for that matter, is to kind of keep them on the edge of the room to some degree, so that way anything they're doing is not covering the ground in the greater space of the room, right? So I always have somewhere to go. So for instance, if I make a mistake and I need to heroic leap somewhere, I know that the other half of the room is not as covered in pools on the ground as where I've been kiting him around. So I typically just kind of try to kite him around the edge and then utilize the middle of the room as like my safe space if I need it. In this fight, you will need it sometimes because it does get pretty hectic between the spores, his explosion pools, and his charge pools on the ground. You can cover this whole battle area if you're not careful. So I would try just to kind of kite him around the edge. That's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate all the support I'm getting on the videos. Please, if you haven't already, go subscribe to the channel for more content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Later.